You step into the gilded halls of the palace, your slippers whispering over polished stone, and immediately, 1,000 invisible eyes press against your back. The torches flicker, casting dancing shadows that seem to stretch their fingers toward you, and you can almost hear the heartbeat of the entire court thrumming through the marble floors. Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander through one of the most nerve-wracking roles imaginable, that of a medieval queen under the crushing, glittering pressure to produce an heir. And honestly, you probably won't survive this without a few deep breaths and maybe a cheeky sip of something spiced and hot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time below. I want to know where you're hiding while I drag you into 15th century paranoia with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the corridors, your gown trailing like a river of velvet behind you. Every hem and fold is meticulously inspected by unseen courtiers, and you feel the weight of every expectation in the very air you breathe. Candles scent the hallway with beeswax and faint incense, mingling with the aroma of baked bread from the kitchens, and somehow, even this domestic warmth feels like another subtle reminder of your purpose. You are a queen, yes, but in this court, a queen's worth is measured in generations, not smiles. Historians still argue whether this pressure was a relentless psychological strain or simply a cultural narrative exaggerated by chroniclers. For you, right now, it feels very, very real. A page scurries past, carrying messages written in spidery handwriting. Some are mundane, reminders about audience schedules or the king's hunting trips. Others are sharper, almost dagger-like, inquiries about health, questions about your menstrual cycle, hints about whether the royal womb is fulfilling its destiny. Fringe accounts whisper that in some courts, kings would keep lists of their wives' ovulation cycles as meticulously as they recorded troop movements, though scholars still debate whether these records were accurate or more a tool for gossip. You try not to wince. You pause before a tapestry depicting your ancestors, fierce women in gold-embroidered dresses, their faces set with stoic determination. You imagine them whispering advice across time. Remember, the throne is watching. There's something almost comical in picturing them with powdered noses, giving lectures about childbearing as if it were a simple algebra problem. But the laughter dies quickly in your throat. Every brushstroke of gold, every stitch, is a reminder that your life is sewn into a larger narrative that stretches centuries before and will stretch centuries after. As you reach the great hall, the court gathers like a tide of murmuring shadows. Knights bow, pages curtsy, and ladies in waiting flutter about with trays of fruit and scented oils. You trudge through it all, your body trained to perform grace, yet every step feels like walking a tightrope over a pit of invisible spikes. You sense the unspoken evaluation. Is she healthy? Is she capable? Is she fertile? Fertility in this world is as much a political tool as it is a biological fact. Some fringe historians suggest that certain queens employed secret remedies, from powdered gemstones to strange rituals involving mirrors, to entice pregnancy, though mainstream scholarship remains skeptical about the efficacy. You pause to let the ceremonial fan sweep past your face, a whisper of silk brushing your cheek. It carries a faint scent of rosewater, which you inhale deeply, pretending to be calm while every nerve stands at attention. You remember reading that one queen, according to court gossip, would sneak a single cherry before a public appearance to sweeten the womb, a detail historians still debate for authenticity. You bite back a smirk. It feels absurd, yet somehow, in this world, the absurd is mandatory. The king appears at the far end of the hall, flanked by his council. He nods at you with that practiced smile that masks suspicion and impatience, and suddenly you're acutely aware of every heartbeat, every tiny movement, as if the very walls can judge your worth. Every queen before you, every childless predecessor, every whispered warning, it's all alive in the palace, pressing down on your shoulders. You remember that crocodile dung was once recommended as a fertility aid, and despite how ridiculous that sounds, the notion somehow makes the weight a little lighter. Maybe humor is the only defense against centuries of expectation. You take your place on the dais, the velvet cushion beneath you soft but insufficient against the relentless pressure. The courtiers bow and murmur in greeting, some with genuine warmth, others with the glint of opportunity in their eyes. You nod politely, your lips curved in an effortless smile, while your mind counts the invisible stakes, the next heir, the next alliance, the next rumor. Scholars still argue whether queens' psychological experiences are accurately captured in contemporary chronicles or are mostly reconstructed by historians' imaginations. But right now, you feel the entire world compressing into your chest. As the hall continues its slow choreography, you notice the details, the way the candlelight gleams off gilded edges, the faint creak of floorboards, the distant clatter of horses in the courtyard. Every sound is amplified, every scent a reminder that you are never truly alone, never merely yourself. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens developed rituals for mental resilience, chanting, counting tiles, tracing patterns in their gowns. But historians debate how widespread or effective these methods really were. You try one of them, pressing your thumb against the silk lining and counting each golden stitch, and feel, just for a heartbeat, a thin layer of calm. The sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the hall, and you realize the day is far from over. Yet as the torches are lit and the echoes of footsteps fade, there is a strange intimacy in the quiet moments between ceremonies. You exhale slowly, allowing yourself a fleeting awareness that, even in this gilded cage, you are alive and somehow still defiant. The throne's silent expectation still looms, but in the spaces between the duties and the small touches of silk and wax and whispered advice, you find the faintest glimmer of your own agency. And with that, the palace hums around you, alive, vigilant, unyielding, yet somehow inviting you into its story. A story that you tonight will carry through candlelight, through rumor, and through the weight of history itself. You wake before the sun, though in truth, the palace never truly sleeps. The muffled clatter of boots on stone, the low hum of servants arranging the day, it all drifts through your chambers like an ever-present tide. You trudge across the cold floor, pulling the velvet curtains aside, and the morning light cuts through the air like a sharp blade. Courtiers have already begun their subtle evaluations, and you know the second your slippers hit the floor, the court is already taking stock. Hey, don't even think about rolling over and pretending you're still asleep. Every heartbeat here is a performance. Breakfast arrives, not as a moment of pleasure but as a ritual of surveillance. The soft clink of silver spoons against porcelain bowls, the smell of almond milk and warmed bread, even the carefully peeled fruit, it all serves as a stage. You pretend to sip delicately, though your mind is counting every watchful eye, every sideways glance from the ladies in waiting who know your worth hinges on what your womb will produce. Historians still argue whether these mornings were genuinely nourishing or simply ceremonial theater designed to reinforce hierarchy. To you, it feels a little like both, and mostly exhausting. You trudge to your perfumed bath next, the water steamy and scented with rose petals. The tub, carved of marble and polished smooth, is luxurious enough to distract for a moment, but the attendants hovering at the edges remind you that nothing is ever just about comfort. Fringe accounts claim that some queens insisted on the bathwater being infused with crushed pearls or even powdered gold, under the belief it would enhance fertility or preserve youth. You press your lips together and resist the urge to smirk. It sounds ridiculous, but when centuries of expectation press on your spine, ridiculous often feels necessary. As the bath attendants fuss with towels and combs, you catch glimpses of your reflection in the polished mirrors, small rectangles of glass that multiply your image endlessly. The queen staring back at you seems calm, poised, and flawless, but you know better. Every shadow beneath your eyes, every wrinkle at the corner of your mouth, could be interpreted as weakness. Some fringe sources suggest queens would secretly mark their skin with tiny lines or dots to track health cycles, though mainstream historians still debate whether such practices were common or anecdotal exaggeration. You trace a finger along the curve of your cheek and wonder if the mirrors are judging you more harshly than the courtiers ever could. Dressing comes next, a slow choreography of layers, brocades, and stiffened silks. Each piece is both armor and adornment. The corset cinches your torso like a gentle vice, reminding you of the societal squeeze you live under, while the embroidered sleeves whisper of lineage and wealth. You remember that some queens, according to fringe accounts, secretly wore hidden charms or herbs sewn into hems to influence fertility, a detail historians still argue about in terms of plausibility. You adjust the sleeves anyway because, superstition or not, the act of controlling something, however minor, feels almost like power. Once fully robed, you step into the hall of mirrors and tapestries where the courtiers gather for the morning audience. Knights in polished armor bow, and pages curtsy in perfect unison. You trudge forward, acknowledging greetings with gentle nods, all while your mind runs through the invisible checklist. Has anyone noticed your fatigue? Are there questions about children in today's letters? Did a rumor spread overnight that could undermine your position? Every detail counts, every perception is amplified. Historians still argue whether queens internalized this scrutiny consciously or if it became second nature, but from your side of the dais, it feels like every fiber of your being is being measured. The king appears, as always, at the exact same hour, flanked by advisors with eyebrows arched and fingers steepled. You note the tiny signs of impatience in his gaze, the barely perceptible nods and shifts of posture. In this moment, you are acutely aware that the primary lens through which you are evaluated is not your intelligence, not your diplomacy, but your capacity to bear an air. Fringe records suggest that some queens developed subtle facial exercises to convey vitality, manipulating smiles and eyelid lifts like secret weapons in court politics, though historians remain divided on whether such tactics were widespread or anecdotal curiosities. You force the practiced smile that conveys calm while your stomach twists with anticipation. The morning continues with the usual round of letters, petitions, and ceremonial duties. Courtiers shuffle forward with parchment, bearing requests both trivial and urgent. You trudge through the motions, reading aloud with steady cadence, but every word is double-edged. One mispronounced title, one delayed acknowledgement, could signal weakness in the intricate web of influence surrounding the throne. You glance at the tapestry behind the dais, your ancestors, stern-faced and commanding, and for a brief moment you feel bolstered by their imagined approval. Or maybe it's just the caffeine from the spiced wine they let you sip, an indulgence you barely dare enjoy in public. By mid-morning, your body is already feeling the subtle fatigue of performance. You trudge toward the window to observe the gardens below, the dew glistening like shards of diamond on the trimmed hedges. Courtiers scurry along the gravel paths, tiny ant-like figures performing their assigned roles, just as you are performing yours. Fringe accounts suggest some queens took this moment to secretly converse with herbalists or midwives, plotting subtle interventions for fertility, though historians still debate how influential such quiet maneuvers truly were. You inhale deeply, letting the crisp morning air fill your lungs, a small rebellion against the weight pressing in from every direction. And as the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows through the high windows, you realize that every morning ritual, breakfast, bath, dressing, public appearances, is a rehearsal in a play with no intermission. Every smile, every nod, every measured gesture is a defense against the court's judgment, a shield against whispered doubts. And yet, in the midst of it all, you find a rhythm, a slow, breathing cadence that allows you to endure, at least until the next wave of expectation crashes over you. Even now, as the morning transitions into the bustling energy of midday, you can feel the quiet undercurrent, a palace alive with observation, rumor, and desire, pressing down like a velvet-swathed weight. But you trudge onward because in this world, the ability to carry yourself with grace, even under relentless scrutiny, is both survival and subtle rebellion. You trudge toward the private chambers, a corridor narrower and quieter than the public halls, but no less charged. The walls are lined with tapestries depicting hunts, battles, and ancestral triumphs, and each figure seems to peer at you with silent judgment. In this quieter domain, the stakes shift, because now it's not just the court watching, it's the marriage itself, the alliance sealed in gold and ceremony, the union that is less about love and more about the survival of dynasties. The bedchamber, heavy with velvet drapes and scented candles, carries its own invisible weight. Hey, don't get any romantic notions. In this palace, the marriage bed is a chessboard, and every move, every glance has consequences you might not survive lightly. You notice the king waiting, as if he has materialized from the air itself, his posture poised but distant. The court may not be here, but the legacy of their eyes lingers. This is the space where alliances are reinforced, lineage determined, and pressure crystallized. Fringe accounts whisper that some queens employed subtle charms, herbal infusions, scented oils, even secret incantations, to enhance fertility or influence their husbands' attentions, though historians still argue whether these methods were practical or merely symbolic theater. You feel a pulse of absurdity alongside tension, because in a world so measured by heirs and wombs, even superstition can be a kind of weapon. The act itself is perfunctory, ritualized almost to the point of being mechanical. You trudge through it as if walking a tightrope, graceful yet painfully aware of every expectation. Your mind drifts, calculating timing, interpreting every shift in the king's mood. You've read accounts of queens who, in their desperation or ingenuity, tried to manipulate conditions, lighting the right candles, wearing certain colors, timing meals and herbs, believing that the gods, the stars, or the unseen spirits might tilt the odds in their favor. Some fringe records even claim that certain queens would arrange the bed in precise geometric patterns, invoking numerology to encourage conception. Scholars still debate whether these rituals ever had real influence or were mostly psychological comfort for women in a position with no true agency. You remember the whisperings of your predecessors, stories carried like delicate scrolls through the corridors. A queen whose influence over her husband determined the survival of an entire dynasty. A mistress who turned court favor with nothing more than clever timing and subtle gestures. Every movement in the bedchamber now feels amplified, a performance under the weight of centuries of expectation. Even love, should it ever appear, is filtered through politics. You wonder if the king feels the pressure too, or if he drifts through the ritual with casual detachment, unconcerned with the centuries of bloodlines balancing on your shoulders. And yet, in the midst of this mechanical dance, you trudge forward with quiet strategy. Some queens, fringe historians suggest, employed secret messages in embroidery, subtle touches in gloves, or whispered phrases to guide the king toward compliance, tiny rebellions hidden in plain sight. The court still debates whether these strategies were widespread or only survived as anecdotal curiosities. You roll your eyes at the thought, but a part of you admires the ingenuity. In a system that leaves so little room for genuine control, even the smallest act of influence can feel revolutionary. The tension is not merely physical. You can feel it pressing into your chest, winding tight like a coiled rope. Every glance, every sigh, every carefully measured word in the moments before and after the act becomes another layer of theater, another thread in the tapestry of expectations. Fringe accounts claim that some queens would enlist midwives or confidants to time meals, herbs, and other interventions, crafting an invisible choreography designed to maximize chances of conception. Historians still argue whether these interventions were truly widespread or merely sensationalized stories preserved for dramatic effect. You can't help but think that survival often meant becoming an expert in subtle manipulation rather than open negotiation. The aftermath is just as delicate as the performance itself. You trudge back to your private corner of the chamber, settling onto a cushioned chair with a sigh that might be audible if anyone were listening. The tension slowly ebbs, though never entirely, leaving behind a lingering sense of responsibility, an invisible chain linking womb to crown, body to dynasty. Some queens, fringe records suggest, kept small journals or talismans in which they marked cycles, moods, and minor rituals, seeking control in the only space left to them. Historians still debate the reliability of these documents, whether they reflect genuine practices or are reconstructed through legend and imagination. And as you gaze at the flickering candlelight, reflecting off gilded mirrors and polished surfaces, the enormity of the role settles on your shoulders again. The palace, the court, the king, and the invisible eyes of ancestors all converge in this quiet chamber. The marriage bed is no longer simply about union. It is a stage, a laboratory, and sometimes a battlefield, where every misstep could have consequences far beyond the body. You trudge through it all, mindful of legacy, aware of superstition, and constantly negotiating the tension between duty and desire. By the time you finally rise and adjust the heavy curtains, the morning has blurred into afternoon. The palace hums with its usual undertone of observation and evaluation, and you trudge toward the next duty, aware that even the private spaces of your life are governed by strategy, expectation, and history. Fringe tales might whisper of queens who turned these pressures into subtle acts of defiance, planting herbs for luck, reciting silent prayers for strength, or whispering clever words to the king to buy themselves time. But the real skill, you realize, is moving through the rituals with grace, even when your body and mind are exhausted by the stakes imposed before birth, before gossip, before life itself. And so you step back into the hallways, every layer of velvet and silk a shield, every measured smile a negotiation, every heartbeat a quiet declaration of resilience. The marriage bed politics are just the beginning, the first of countless arenas where the expectation of producing an heir shapes your entire existence. And yet somehow, you keep walking, keep tripping, keep performing, because in this world a queen without an heir is a story unfinished, a page torn from the chronicle of history. You trudge down a dim corridor lined with tapestries, and the palace suddenly feels smaller, heavier, as if the air itself carries gossip and powdered secrets. The walls seem to hum with whispers of fertility, stories, remedies, potions, and rituals passed from one queen to the next, whispered in corners where no one but attendants and confidants dare linger. You glance at the flickering candlelight and wonder if these shadows are listening too. Hey, don't get too cozy imagining the walls have ears. They probably do, and worse, they probably report everything. You trudge into the small inner chamber reserved for midwives and secret advisors, the space perfumed with a mix of lavender, rosemary, and something faintly metallic that makes your nose twitch. Here, the strange and the sacred intertwine. Fringe accounts claim some queens rubbed ointments made from crocodile dung. Yes, crocodile dung, mixed with honey onto their bellies to protect fertility. Historians still debate whether such remedies were widespread practices or merely the colorful exaggeration of chroniclers who enjoyed scandal. You press your lips together, thinking about how much you would need to believe in magic just to survive the anxiety of the moment. The midwife approaches, a small, sharp-eyed woman with hands as precise as a scribe's pen. She lays out jars of strange substances, crushed gemstones, powdered roots, and herbs that smell faintly of rain on stone. You trudge carefully around them, inhaling the aromas that are somehow comforting and alarming all at once. You remember fringe tales that some queens would carry tiny charms sewn into their gowns, tiny pieces of bone, charms carved from ivory, little knots of herbs, to ensure conception. Scholars still argue whether these practices were more symbolic reassurance than medical intervention. You try to focus on the textures, the colors, and the faint humming of incense, rather than the fact that your life is being weighed in invisible balances. You trudge to the small table where letters from distant courts are piled. Each one carries advice, prayers, or warnings about fertility. Some are practical: diet changes, bathing rituals, timing of intercourse. Others border on the bizarre, aligning meals with phases of the moon, sleeping with a silver ring beneath your pillow, or drinking fertility waters blessed by obscure saints. Fringe accounts even claim that some queens had astrologers cast charts not only for themselves, but for the timing of conception, reading the stars like tea leaves in the palace night. Historians still debate how seriously these recommendations were taken versus how much they served as spectacle for the court. You trace a finger across one folded parchment, wondering if belief is stronger than biology. The pressure is omnipresent, heavy like the velvet of your gown pressing against your skin. Courtiers and servants alike hover with subtle scrutiny, whether overt or implied. You trudge through it all, absorbing rumors that flicker like candlelight. Some whisper that herbal remedies can encourage twins, others that specific spices imbue strength in the unborn. You inhale the scents of cinnamon, cardamom, and rosemary, letting them fill your lungs while your mind counts each whisper as both hope and threat. Fringe historians suggest these rituals were more psychological than physiological, yet in the palace, a belief, even a marginal one, can become power. You trudge toward a small alcove where a mirror reflects your face in muted light. The midwife gestures toward it while reciting instructions. Count the steps of the sun across the window, align your thoughts with its path, offer a small prayer before each meal. You try to follow, tracing the light across the floor, murmuring a silent invocation, all while imagining the absurdity of counting sunbeams as a measure of destiny. And yet, in this strange and intricate choreography, you find a rhythm, a thin thread of control over a body and future that feels otherwise dictated. Outside the chamber, the palace hums with life, and the corridor carries echoes of other whispers. One attendant swears a queen once hung a silver bell above her bed to scare away the fetal demons that might prevent conception. Another claims a tiny, carved figure of a stork brought a child within 3 months. Historians still argue whether these talismans were widespread or merely sensational anecdotes, but in your heart, you feel the pull of possibility, no matter how strange the means. You trudge back to the main hall, passing courtiers who nod politely, unaware of the invisible rituals you've performed. Even now, the palace continues its quiet evaluation, its shadows recording your movements, your breaths, your intentions. Fringe records suggest that some queens kept small secret journals documenting these rituals, noting which herbs, prayers, or charms seemed effective, though mainstream historians question their accuracy or existence. You wonder if they were truly magical or simply a way to impose order on the chaos of expectation. The sun begins its descent, casting long golden streaks through high windows. You pause in a quiet corridor, letting the scents, whispers, and distant laughter mingle in your senses. For a brief moment, the palace feels less like a cage and more like a living organism, its rhythms and rituals as strange as they are compelling. You trudge forward, fully aware that every potion, every whispered prayer, every crocodile dung remedy, even the ones that make your nose wrinkle, feeds into the one purpose that has shadowed every step of your life: the pressure to produce an heir. And yet somehow, amid all the absurdity, superstition, and expectation, you find a small flicker of agency. A breath, a thought, a ritual that is yours alone. The corridors may whisper, the midwives may watch, the stars may murmur their judgments, but in these small, private acts, you carve space for yourself. You trudge onward, carrying the centuries of whispers, folklore, and pressure like invisible embroidery sewn into your gown, knowing that the dance between hope, superstition, and reality will continue with every heartbeat of the palace. You trudge through the halls again, this time with a weight heavier than velvet or gold, the awareness that months have passed with no news of pregnancy. The sunlight filters through high windows, falling on the polished floors like judgment itself, and every step echoes with whispers you can almost hear, even when the courtiers are silent. Hey, don't imagine you're alone in feeling the pressure. Every queen before you has felt it too, though they probably didn't admit it. So before anyone notices, take a deep breath, steady your hands, and prepare yourself for the subtle storm of glances and murmurs that awaits. The courtiers greet you politely, but their smiles don't reach their eyes. You trudge past, nodding in acknowledgement, aware that every gesture, however small, is being assessed. The chamberlain adjusts his papers, the ladies in waiting shuffle in perfect rhythm, yet you feel the scrutiny sharpen like a knife under their polite masks. Fringe accounts suggest that some nobles would openly speculate on the queen's fertility, sometimes wagering on outcomes as if birth were a sport. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect actual practices or were sensationalized to emphasize the precariousness of the queen's position. Regardless, the anxiety is palpable, coiling tight around your ribs. You trudge into your private chamber and sink onto a cushion, letting the weight of anticipation press down. Months of expectation, whispers, and ritualistic remedies have culminated in this very moment of waiting. You remember crocodile dung, powdered gemstones, and scented oils, and wonder if any of it matters, or if the court's judgment is already decided. Some fringe accounts claim that queens would perform secret fertility rituals in the middle of the night, hoping the stars might favor their wombs, while historians debate whether these practices were genuine attempts or imaginative reconstructions. You press your palms to your eyes, imagining the eyes of ancestors peering through the tapestry behind you. A knock interrupts your thoughts, a lady in waiting bearing letters. You trudge forward to receive them, knowing some are benign, some subtly loaded. One bears news from distant relatives, congratulating the court on recent births elsewhere. Another carries inquiries from the king's advisors, questioning whether the queen's absence of news might signal trouble. You inhale sharply, the candlelight dancing across the parchment like it's mocking your worry. Fringe accounts suggest courtiers sometimes interpreted even the tiniest detail, a flushed cheek, a tired gait, as evidence of fertility or its absence. Historians still argue about how much these assumptions affected policy versus mere gossip, but right now, you feel the eyes of the entire palace pressing down. You trudge into the gardens for a moment of forced calm. The dew glistens like tiny jewels, the birds chirp obliviously, and the fountains gurgle their ancient rhythm. The natural world continues, indifferent to dynasties, heirs, or the anxiety pressing against your chest. Some queens, fringe historians claim, would walk the gardens deliberately at this hour, seeking to align themselves with nature's cycles, performing secret rituals meant to encourage fertility. Scholars still debate whether such behaviors were deliberate superstition or psychological coping mechanisms. You take a slow breath, pretending to admire the roses while your mind counts months like tally marks against a wall. The rumors start slowly, almost imperceptibly, circulating in quiet corners and hushed whispers. Perhaps the queen is ill, one says. Or worse, murmurs another. You trudge through these whispers, feeling each word land like a pebble against your chest. Some fringe tales suggest that courtiers even created betting pools on the queen's future pregnancies, a dark humor that transforms the intimate and private into a public spectacle. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerations or accurate portrayals of court life, but the tension they represent is undeniable. Every glance, every smile, every politely inquired after symptom becomes a reminder of your precarious position. You trudge back to your private chamber, the corridors stretching endlessly, echoing your steps in exaggerated rhythm. You imagine every servant, every attendant, every minor noble observing you, cataloging each sigh, each subtle gesture. The anxiety coils tighter, wrapping around your ribs and constricting your breath. Fringe sources suggest that some queens would keep detailed notes on each cycle, recording herbs taken, foods eaten, prayers whispered, and even times of day when the king's attentions were most favorable. Historians still debate the authenticity and frequency of these records, yet even the idea of a structured record feels like a thin tether to control amid overwhelming uncertainty. The first signs of doubt begin to gnaw at your mind, like invisible mice nibbling at the edges of certainty. You trudge to the mirror, catching a glimpse of your reflection. A woman who appears calm, composed, regal, but underneath, anxiety coils like a serpent. Every line, every shadow, every twitch becomes amplified in your imagination. The court may not openly judge, but you know that judgment is already encoded in tradition, expectation, and the silent weight of generations. You wonder if any queen truly escapes this invisible cage. By evening, the palace seems to hold its breath. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the floors and walls. The courtiers file out, leaving you alone with your thoughts, the faint hum of distant servants the only sound. You trudge to your chamber window and gaze out over the grounds, imagining the future generations whose lives depend on a single act, a single pregnancy, a single fortunate alignment of stars or herbs or prayers. Fringe accounts claim queens often whispered directly to the stars, asking for guidance, favor, or even mercy. Scholars still debate the influence of such rituals versus mere psychological comfort, but tonight, in the quiet of the palace, you feel that pull of hope, however fragile. And so you trudge into the night, carrying the weight of months without news, every step echoing with expectation and fear. The palace hums around you, alive with unseen eyes and whispered doubts, and you realize that the anxiety of delay is not simply about biology. It is about perception, politics, legacy, and survival. You trudge forward, holding the invisible chain of generations on your shoulders, ready to face the next day, the next ritual, the next whispered judgment, because in this world, every heartbeat, every sigh, every shadowed glance matters. You trudge down the narrow passage toward the physician's chamber, the walls lined with cold stone and faint smells of herbs, wine, and something metallic that makes your stomach twist. The king's advisors have arranged the appointment, though you suspect it is as much about reassurance for the court as it is about your health. Hey, don't imagine this is a friendly checkup. The medieval examination is less, how are you? And more prove that your body is functioning according to dynastic expectations. So take a deep breath, steel your shoulders, and prepare for another round of silent judgment. Inside the chamber, the physician waits, robe stiff and smelling faintly of vinegar and dried herbs. He consults a thick book bound in worn leather, mumbling arcane words as he examines instruments that look more ceremonial than practical. Fringe accounts suggest that some physicians measured the shape of the womb using rudimentary tools or pressed pulse points in ways that seem bizarre to modern eyes. Historians still argue whether these methods had any diagnostic value or were mainly symbolic performances meant to reassure or intimidate. You trudge forward, lifting your sleeve, letting your pulse be scrutinized, and feel the invisible tally of your worth tick upward or downward by the second. The mystic enters next, trailing incense smoke that curls in lazy spirals around your face. Her eyes glint as she unfurls a parchment covered in stars and strange symbols. Fringe tales claim she can predict conception timing, the sex of the child, even the child's future temperament. Historians still debate whether astrology truly guided succession planning or served as an elaborate spectacle to impress courtiers. You trudge closer, trying to mask skepticism, while the faint scent of frankincense fills your lungs and the candlelight flickers across your reflection in the polished floor. You trudge through a battery of awkward examinations, some public, some behind a veil. The midwife checks pulses, inspects subtle changes in the body, and murmurs observations that sound both clinical and cryptic. The mystic consults charts, murmuring about the alignment of Mars and Venus, while the physician scribbles notes, occasionally glancing at the king's waiting representatives. Fringe accounts suggest that astrologers sometimes held more influence over succession decisions than physicians themselves, though historians remain divided on whether this influence was significant or anecdotal. You shift uncomfortably, aware that your body is both object and instrument, a stage for scrutiny and speculation. You trudge through the mental gymnastics required to reconcile all this advice. Take the physician's herbs, but also consider the mystic's timing, and perhaps sprinkle some powdered gemstone into the bathwater just in case. The palace is alive with whispers. Some courtiers praise one method, some scoff, some openly joke in corridors about the queen's strange habits. Fringe historians claim some queens even consulted multiple mystics in secret, comparing predictions and choosing the most favorable outcome. Scholars still argue whether these strategies genuinely affected fertility or were mainly psychological coping mechanisms. You inhale slowly, trying to extract calm from the chaos. The physician leans closer, noting subtle symptoms you hadn't noticed yourself. The mystic murmurs about planetary cycles you barely understand. You trudge through it all, nodding politely, because resistance is not an option. Your life, your dignity, your very legacy is tied to compliance. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens kept tiny charms from these sessions, little reminders of hope and protection, while historians still debate the reliability of such artifacts as evidence of widespread practice. You slip your fingers over the edge of a small talisman hidden in your sleeve, feeling the faint comfort of ritual in your hand. You trudge into a side chamber where the midwife whispers about timing and cycles, mixing advice from both physician and mystic into a single, coherent set of instructions. Take this herb, eat that fruit, sleep at this hour, align your thoughts with the moon, and don't forget to smile for the king. Fringe accounts claim that queens sometimes recorded precise details of these rituals in small, secret journals, though historians argue whether these records are factual or reconstructed from legend. You bite back a smile, thinking that sometimes documentation feels like the only control you have over a world that refuses to yield it freely. The king eventually leaves, satisfied, or perhaps indifferent, while you remain in the chamber, absorbing the combined weight of medical, mystical, and political scrutiny. You trudge to the window, watching the sun crawl across the palace gardens, wondering if any of this will bear fruit. Fringe sources whisper that some queens even consulted astrologers after conception, tracking the stars to protect the unborn child, while scholars still debate whether these practices were genuine attempts to influence outcomes or simply rituals of comfort. You press your forehead against the cool glass, letting the faint breeze remind you that the world outside continues, oblivious to dynasties and anxieties alike. Even as evening approaches, you trudge through reflections on the day's consultations. Every herb, every chart, every whispered incantation forms a tapestry of hope and tension. The palace hums with unseen eyes and hidden judgments, and you realize that survival requires absorbing all advice, blending it into strategy, and maintaining the calm poise expected of a queen. Fringe accounts may exaggerate, historians may debate, but the pressure is undeniably present, pressing into every breath, every heartbeat. By nightfall, you settle into a quiet chamber, the flicker of candlelight softening the edges of reality. You trudge to your chair, talisman in hand, and close your eyes. The day's weight is immense, but at least for a moment, you allow yourself a breath of control, a single act of choice in a world that demands compliance above all else. You trudge onward knowing tomorrow will bring another consultation, another ritual, another whispered hope or speculation, because in the palace, every step, every breath, and every heartbeat is an investment in the air that will define your legacy. You trudge through the courtyard, your heels clicking against stone, as the palace bursts into activity. Today is a festival, one of many scattered across the calendar to celebrate victories, saints, or royal anniversaries. You watch knights polish armor, trumpeters practice their fanfares, and ladies in waiting adjust their gowns in nervous anticipation. Hey, don't imagine this is just a celebration. The banners, the music, the feasts are all a reminder that every glance you draw, every gesture you make, is being evaluated under the invisible microscope of dynastic expectation. So take a deep breath, smooth your gown, and trudge forward because the eyes of centuries are watching. You remember that each festival, each joust, is both spectacle and test. You trudge past the archery field, where nobles practice with deadly precision, imagining that each arrow somehow represents the silent calculations of fertility and succession. Fringe accounts suggest that queens were subtly judged on posture, gait, and expressions during public appearances, as if an elegant stance could signal health, vitality, or even the promise of heirs. Historians still argue how much these assessments were taken seriously versus serving as performative tradition. Either way, every smile, every nod, every movement is a performance choreographed under pressure. The banquet hall stretches ahead, alive with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and candles flickering in golden candelabras. You trudge inside, aware that the high tables are not merely for dining. They are a theater of status and influence. Courtiers murmur among themselves, noting your poise, your composure, and whether the curves of your figure, the blush on your cheeks, the sparkle in your eyes align with expectations of fertility. Fringe tales whisper that some queens would discreetly adjust jewelry, fan themselves strategically, or even place charms under the table to signal vitality. Scholars still debate whether these small gestures were truly meaningful or merely performative anecdotes, but in this moment, you cannot help but feel the weight. You trudge to your place at the dais, the cushion soft beneath your gown but offering no relief from the invisible pressure. Musicians play lute and harp while dancers spin across the polished floor, each movement observed and assessed. You notice a whisper of gossip circulating near the far end of the hall. A noble speculates on whether you are expecting. Another comments on the timing of your last known menstrual cycle. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens employed discreet gestures, subtle eye contact, or faint smiles to control perception of their fertility, though historians remain divided on how effective or widespread these methods were. You trudge through it all, projecting calm while your mind calculates every nuance. The jousts begin outside, trumpets blaring, banners snapping in the wind. You trudge to a balcony to watch, aware that the palace grounds themselves are a stage for political theater. Every cheer, every clash of lances, every fall from a horse is mirrored in the corridors as whispers about succession and lineage. Fringe sources claim that some queens timed public appearances around certain events to project vigor or health, subtly signaling readiness to bear heirs. Historians still debate whether these gestures truly influenced court perception or were later exaggerations. But in the midst of the festival, the symbolism is inescapable. You trudge through the subtle choreography of public engagement, nodding, smiling, acknowledging greetings with perfect timing. The children of nobles run past, laughing, oblivious to the calculations swirling around them. You pause to observe a young squire practicing sword drills and feel a pang of irony. His life is structured around training for battles, yours around producing heirs. Fringe historians suggest that queens were acutely aware of these contrasts, sometimes using observation of youth and vitality as a subtle reminder of the importance of their own reproductive role. Scholars still argue whether these insights were conscious strategy or incidental reflection, but for you, the tension is very real. The afternoon stretches, each moment a test of endurance. You trudge through speeches, bowing to distant dignitaries, responding to inquiries about alliances, while internally counting every heartbeat, every whispered speculation. Fringe accounts claim that some queens secretly drank spiced concoctions or consumed particular foods during festivals to suggest health and fertility, though historians still debate whether these practices were genuine or merely anecdotal. You smooth the folds of your gown, pretending the weight is entirely decorative rather than symbolic of centuries of expectation. By evening, as the festival winds down and torches flicker in the cooling air, you trudge to the quieter corridors of the palace, allowing yourself a few measured breaths. The music fades, laughter dissipates, but the invisible evaluation persists. Every festival, feast, and public appearance is a reminder that your ultimate measure is not diplomacy, wit, or charm, but the promise contained in your womb. Fringe tales whisper that queens sometimes kept small talismans hidden in their gowns during these events, subtle acts of reassurance in a world that constantly measures their worth. Historians still argue about the prevalence and impact of such items, but you trudge onward, drawing strength where you can. And so you move through the palace, every festival a stage, every feast a judgment, every joust a silent reminder. The weight of expectation never pauses, never rests, and never allows indulgence in ease. You trudge forward, conscious of every glance, every gesture, every whispered speculation. The court lives and breathes around you, a theater of perpetual observation, and you, its queen, are always at center stage, graceful, poised, and carrying the invisible, inescapable weight of generations who measured you by one unyielding standard: the production of an heir. You trudge into the great hall again, but this time the air feels different, heavier, expectant, buzzing with the energy of whispered speculation. The court has caught wind, faintly, that something might be changing inside you. Maybe it's a subtle roundness in your belly, a hint of morning fatigue, or perhaps just rumor itself doing its invisible work. Hey, don't let yourself believe you're safe yet. Pregnancy in this palace is less a private blessing and more a performance under 1,000 critical eyes. So, steady your shoulders, smooth your gown, and trudge forward, because every glance will now measure not only grace, but potential motherhood. You notice how the courtiers shift subtly as you pass. Knights bow with slightly exaggerated politeness. Ladies in waiting flutter with whispers that reach the corners of your consciousness. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens would practice symptoms, wearing discreet padding or adjusting posture to signal fertility when rumors ran dry, though historians still debate how widespread or strategic these gestures were. You trudge through the scrutiny, adjusting your stance, tilting your chin just so, all while imagining invisible tally marks being scribbled on the walls by unseen hands. Every movement becomes a subtle negotiation. You trudge down corridors, pausing at tapestries, pretending to admire embroidered flowers while simultaneously calculating whether the sway of your gown hints at pregnancy or invites gossip. Some fringe sources claim that queens might carry small charms in pockets of their dresses, placing them near the belly to encourage vitality in the unborn child. Historians still argue about the reliability of these accounts, but in your mind, the act, however symbolic, offers a tiny fraction of control in a world that measures you incessantly. You trudge toward the balcony for the first of several carefully timed appearances. The garden below glistens in sunlight, banners flutter and nobles gather, eyes sharp and speculative. Every footstep is amplified, every gesture scrutinized. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens would deliberately eat specific foods in public: apples, cherries, or spice pastries, to signal health and fertility. Historians still debate whether such performances influence perception meaningfully, but in the swirling currents of court gossip, appearances are as powerful as reality. You feel the subtle twinges, the faint fatigue, the internal reminders that your body is now performing on the most delicate stage imaginable. You trudge through ceremonial greetings with a practiced smile, every bow and nod calibrated to convey vitality without betraying fear of miscarriage. Fringe historians whisper that some queens faked early pregnancy symptoms to delay political pressures or ward off rivals, while scholars argue whether these stories are factual or narrative embellishment. You pause in the hallway, pressing a gloved hand to your belly, feeling simultaneously the thrill of hope and the terror of expectation. The musicians play a soft fanfare for a visiting dignitary, and you trudge past with a careful sway, allowing the rhythm to dictate your steps without betraying too much. Every whisper, every flicker of candlelight, every shadow seems to comment on you. Will she succeed? Will she fail? Is the heir coming? Fringe sources claim that some queens would even adjust lighting, drapery, or seating to manipulate how their form appeared in public. Historians still debate how much these manipulations mattered, but in a court that thrives on perception, subtlety is power. You trudge through the next few weeks of appearances, each day a new performance. The palace is alive with speculation. A midwife is discreetly consulted. A letter arrives from a distant court celebrating a recent birth. A rumor flutters past your ear like a bird on the windowsill. Fringe accounts whisper that some queens employed special corsets, gently padded to conceal or reveal the early swell of pregnancy according to strategy. Scholars still argue whether these garments were widely used or anecdotal curiosities, but the principle is clear. Pregnancy is public, strategic, and performative. You notice your own body responding to the pressure. Every meal, every footstep, every conversation feels amplified. You trudge to the private chambers, letting the weight of expectation settle alongside you. Even in solitude, the performance continues. The memory of the court's gaze, the echo of rumors, the faint scent of incense lingering from public rituals. Fringe historians suggest that queens would sometimes perform small, private rituals to reinforce both hope and protection for the unborn child. Touching charms, murmuring prayers, or observing precise moments in the sun's path. Scholars still debate how much these rituals influenced outcomes versus served as psychological comfort. By evening, the palace quiets, but the whispers remain. You trudge through corridors alone, candlelight flickering against the walls, imagining how courtiers discuss your movements, your posture, your gestures, all measures of vitality and promise. The pregnancy is now both a gift and a burden, celebrated and surveilled, mystical and political, private and profoundly public. Fringe accounts suggest that queens sometimes rehearsed interactions to convey calm and health, ensuring that perception remained favorable, while historians continue to debate whether these acts were widespread strategies or rare anecdotes. And so, you trudge onward, every step a careful calculation, every smile a negotiation, every pause a performance. Your body carries new life, yes, but it also carries the invisible ledger of expectation, the collective breath of the court, the anxious eyes of generations past and future. Pregnancy in this palace is not simply biological, it is an art, a performance, and a battle against both rumor and reality. You trudge through it, holding onto whatever semblance of agency you can, because in this court, every heartbeat, every gesture, every breath is a declaration. You are not merely surviving, you are performing, and the heir must come. You trudge through the corridors with a careful, measured gait, each step echoing softly against the stone walls. The palace hums around you, but it feels distant now, as if muffled by the tension building inside your chest. The child, your child, is expected soon, and every nerve, every muscle, every whispered heartbeat feels amplified. Hey, don't think the waiting gets easier. It doesn't. In fact, the closer the birth, the more the palace itself seems to hold its breath. So steady your steps, smooth the folds of your gown, and trudge forward into the quiet storm of expectation. Courtiers no longer merely observe. You feel them measuring, predicting, speculating. The chamberlain's eyes linger too long, the midwives whisper too softly, and even the guards seem to notice something is imminent. Fringe accounts suggest that queens in late pregnancy would be surrounded by subtle layers of ritual and surveillance, charms to protect the child, herbs to ease labor, and prayers timed precisely with dawn and dusk. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were or whether they were anecdotal exaggerations, but in this palace, you feel every ounce of preparation as tangible pressure. You trudge to the inner chamber where the midwife waits, candles flickering in golden sconces, incense curling lazily through the air. The room is filled with herbs, linen, and the faint metallic scent of medicinal concoctions. The midwife's eyes meet yours, calm and steady, yet you feel them carry the weight of centuries of deliveries and miscarriages, successes and failures. Fringe accounts claim that some queens carried secret charms sewn into their gowns, pressed near the abdomen, to guide labor or protect the newborn. Scholars still debate whether these rituals influenced outcomes or were psychological comfort, but right now, the act of believing, even faintly, offers a thread of reassurance. You trudge through the hours before labor, adjusting cushions, sipping spiced drinks, inhaling the scent of rosemary and lavender that fills the chamber. Every sensation feels magnified. A flutter, a twinge, a shift in the child's position becomes a signal, a message, a whisper of hope or warning. Fringe historians suggest some queens performed private gestures, touching charms, repeating prayers, or quietly speaking to the child in utero, to assert agency over the process. Scholars continue to debate the frequency and seriousness of these practices, but you trudge along, grasping whatever semblance of control you can. The court is not idle. News travels quickly along corridors. The queen shows signs of imminent labor, one whispers, while another adds, "Is she ready? Will the heir survive?" You trudge through the awareness that these murmurs are more than idle gossip. They shape perception, influence alliances, and weigh heavily on your mind. Fringe accounts claim that some queens would rehearse how to present the newborn to the court, considering gestures, expressions, and even the order in which attendants were arranged. Historians still debate whether these preparations were standard practice or exceptional instances of courtly meticulousness. Either way, You feel the invisible ledger of expectation pressing down on your shoulders. You trudge toward the window, gazing over the gardens that glimmer in the late afternoon sun. The fountains murmur as if aware of your tension. Birds flit among trimmed hedges, oblivious to dynasties and heirs. Fringe tales suggest that some queens timed prayers or charms with the setting sun, believing that celestial alignment could ease labor. Scholars continue to debate the plausibility, but you let the soft gold of sunlight warm your face, willing it to carry calm into your body, even as nerves coil tighter with each passing moment. The hours stretch, and every subtle sensation is magnified. You trudge along corridors to pace gently, easing tension, noticing the smallest contractions, the smallest shifts. The midwife follows silently, measuring time with quiet precision, occasionally adjusting herbs or linens, whispering encouragement. Fringe accounts claim that some queens would ingest particular concoctions or rely on certain oils to ease labor pains, though historians remain divided on their efficacy. You focus on the ritual of movement, the sway of your body, the sound of your own breathing, seeking rhythm amid chaos. Even the palace itself seems to hold its breath. Courtiers linger at the edges of hallways, attendants hurry softly, and whispers travel faster than footfalls. You trudge through each moment aware that the impending birth is a culmination of centuries of expectation. The bloodline, the dynasty, the whispers of ancestors, the calculations of astrologers, the rituals of midwives, all converging in your body. Fringe sources claim that some queens would touch images of saints or relics during labor, seeking divine favor for the child's survival. Historians still argue about how widespread these practices were, but in your mind, even the smallest act of hope carries immense power. You trudge to the bedchamber, where the final preparations are made. Linens are folded, herbs arranged, candles lit in precise alignment. You press your hands to your abdomen, feeling the child move, a reminder that this is your body, your moment, your tenuous control in a world that has monitored you from day one. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens whispered directly to the child, murmuring encouragement or prayers for strength. Scholars debate whether these acts were symbolic or psychologically beneficial, but you embrace the ritual, holding onto every fragment of agency it offers. And so you wait, breathing slowly, counting each flutter, each contraction, each subtle sign, knowing that every heartbeat carries expectation, hope, fear, and legacy. You trudge through the anxiety, holding onto the delicate rhythm of life within you, aware that the palace, the court, the king, and the ancestors all converge in this single moment. Every step, every sigh, every gesture is a testament to survival, performance, and resilience. And as the night descends, you realize that no matter the outcome, you have carried this burden, this anticipation with grace, strategy, and endurance. You trudge across the chamber, the candlelight flickering against the walls, shadows twisting like ancient whispers. The first twinges hit, a sudden sharp reminder that the child is ready to arrive, that all the months of waiting, rituals, and whispered anxieties are converging into this single, unstoppable moment. Hey, don't imagine you're calm. No queen ever is at this instant. So brace yourself, clutch the cushions, and trudge forward into the surge of fear, pain, and anticipation. The midwife is already at your side, calm and precise, moving with the certainty of countless births behind her. You trudge to the bed, sinking into the cool linens, the scents of lavender, rosemary, and warm wax curling around you. Fringe accounts claim that some queens would have relics placed beneath the pillow or at the bedside during labor, tiny charms, blessed images, or even herbs, believed to protect both mother and child. Historians still debate whether these objects truly held significance beyond symbolism, but tonight, you clutch the nearest charm like it contains the weight of the dynasty itself. You feel the contractions building, each one sharper than the last, stretching across your back and abdomen in a rhythm that alternates between agony and control. You trudge through the pain with deliberate focus, breathing in patterns taught by midwives and whispered by other queens before you. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens maintained a strict diet or drank specific herbal infusions in late labor to ease the process, while historians argue about the effectiveness of such measures. You swallow the taste of spiced wine offered by the attendants, hoping for relief, praying for endurance, imagining the child's tiny form preparing for its first breath. The palace outside hums faintly, a distant echo of courtly life continuing while your world narrows to the chamber. Courtiers hover in the antechamber, their whispers restrained but present, carrying anxiety, hope, and speculation through the corridors. You trudge through it all, aware that even unseen eyes measure your resolve, your strength, your ability to survive the night. Fringe accounts claim that astrologers sometimes timed labor to favorable celestial alignments, but historians still argue whether these interventions truly influenced outcomes or were purely symbolic gestures. For you, the thought is a fragile comfort, a thread of narrative woven through the chaos. Every twinge, every pulse of pain is both physical and psychological, reminding you of the stakes. You trudge through the surge, pressing your palms to the mattress, counting breaths, whispering prayers, repeating charm rituals under your breath. Fringe sources whisper that some queens repeated sacred phrases during contractions to strengthen the child's vitality, while historians debate whether these were genuine practices or later embellishments. Either way, your mind clings to each mantra like a life preserver amid waves of fear and exhaustion. The midwife coaches softly, adjusting pillows, murmuring instructions, and guiding your body with a firm but gentle hand. You trudge through each contraction, alternating between surrender and control, aware that the room carries centuries of expectation. Ancestors, courtiers, the king, the dynasty. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens, attendants would ring small bells or light specific candles to mark stages of labor, while scholars still debate whether these were functional cues or ritualistic gestures. The palace itself seems to pulse in rhythm with your own, each flicker of candlelight like a heartbeat echoing the urgency of survival. You feel the pressure build, the child's movement intense, and a surge of fear unlike anything before grips your chest. You trudge through the panic, remembering the midwife's guidance, the charms, the whispered prayers, the herbs laid in careful patterns. Fringe historians claim that some queens called upon protective saints during this moment, tracing symbols in the air above their bellies, murmuring incantations to guard against danger. Scholars argue whether such practices were symbolic or psychologically comforting, but you cling to every ritual, every tradition, every fragment of hope. Minutes stretch into hours, and the room feels both confined and infinite. You trudge through the contractions, feeling your body surrender while maintaining a fierce grip on composure. The midwife encourages, the attendants adjust linens and herbs, and the palace outside continues its quiet observation, as if aware of the monumental act unfolding within. Fringe sources whisper of queens who sang quietly or recited rhymes to themselves during labor, rituals meant to guide the child safely into the world. Historians debate whether these were widespread practices or romanticized stories, but for you, the rhythm is everything: breath, pulse, whispered charm, hope. You trudge further into the crescendo of labor, each contraction a tidal wave of sensation and fear. The palace walls seem to lean in, the flickering light painting the shadows alive, as if the ghosts of queens past are present, watching, whispering guidance. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens would clutch miniature relics or touch the charms sewn into their gowns for courage, strength, or protection. Scholars still argue about prevalence, but you feel the weight of history, the dynasty, and hope converge in your clenched hands and steadying breaths. And finally, amid fear, exhaustion, and anticipation, the moment approaches, the culmination of months, years, and centuries of expectation. You trudge through the surge, every muscle and breath a negotiation with life itself, every pulse echoing the stakes laid down long before you were born. The palace, the court, the dynasty, all hold their collective breath as you trudge forward into the act that defines the queen, the mother, and the legacy of generations yet unborn. You trudge through the final surge of labor, every muscle trembling, every breath measured, until finally, a cry pierces the chamber. The sound is both sharp and miraculous, reverberating through your chest and across the palace walls. Hey, don't imagine this is instant relief. Your body aches, your mind races, and yet somehow the first heartbeat of your child silences 1,000 whispers. You press your hands to the linens, feeling the weight of survival, expectation, and triumph all at once. The midwife places the newborn in your arms, swaddled in soft linen. You trudge to hold the tiny, fragile being against your chest, feeling its rapid heartbeat echoing your own. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens immediately whispered protective charms or blessings into the child's ears, small rituals meant to safeguard health and destiny. Historians still debate the prevalence or significance of these practices, but in your arms, it feels vital, as though your whispered words stitch together past, present, and future in a single fragile thread. The palace itself seems to shift around you. Courtiers gather in the outer chambers, peering through lattice windows or listening at doors, whispers circulating like wind through autumn leaves. You trudge through the awareness that every gaze, every sigh of relief, every murmur of congratulations is weighed alongside calculation. The child is not merely a life. It is a dynasty, a political statement, a tangible measure of your worth. Fringe sources claim that some nobles would immediately speculate on the child's sex, health, or appearance, interpreting tiny details as omens for the future. Scholars still argue whether this scrutiny was casual curiosity or a deeply political act. You trudge through the mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, rocking the child gently in your arms. The midwife whispers instructions for aftercare, positioning, and feeding, her voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos outside. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens kept small charms or relics pressed against the child during the first hours, a protective gesture that symbolically connected the newborn to divine favor and ancestral lineage. Historians debate the authenticity and frequency of such practices, but the tiny weight in your arms feels like a bridge to hope and survival. The king arrives, summoned to witness the culmination of the months of expectation. You trudge forward, balancing both pride and anxiety, presenting the child with the grace the court demands. Courtiers follow suit, offering measured expressions of awe, relief, or discreet evaluation. Fringe accounts suggest that the presentation itself was ritualized. The child's swaddling, the queen's posture, even the timing of the first word or movement was observed and interpreted. Scholars still debate how strict these protocols were, but you trudge through the choreography, every gesture a calculated mix of tradition and instinct. You notice the whispers beginning anew. Some admire the child's vigor, some speculate on the child's gender and future, some note the queen's composure despite exhaustion. Fringe historians claim that courtiers sometimes measured the queen's worth in the first moments after birth, using subtle cues like color in her cheeks, steadiness of hands, or posture to gauge her resilience. Scholars argue whether such observations carried real consequence or were anecdotal embellishments, but you feel every gaze, every judgment like a weight pressing down, even as joy flickers in your chest. You trudge through the hours of post-birth ritual, offerings of wine, blessings from attending clergy, and whispered prayers from attendants who hover in reverent awe. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens used these moments to assert authority subtly, reminding the court that their role was both maternal and sovereign. Historians still debate whether these gestures were political strategy or incidental, but in the palace's golden candlelight, you feel the power and fragility of both mother and monarch intertwined. You trudge through the child's first hours, noticing how even the slightest action, the infant's cry, the tightening of a tiny fist, the turn of a head, seems to echo in the court beyond. Fringe sources whisper that some queens documented these first hours meticulously, recording every minute to protect the child's place in the dynasty. Scholars debate whether such documentation was widespread or exceptional, but you feel a surge of purpose. The act of recording is an act of survival, an assertion of control in a world otherwise dictated by expectation. The palace slowly settles into a quieter rhythm, though the echoes of celebration and speculation remain. You trudge through the realization that the birth is not the conclusion, but another layer in the tapestry of duty. The child is alive, yes, but already observed, already measured, already positioned within centuries of dynastic calculation. Fringe accounts claim that even after birth, queens maintained rituals, charms, and prayers to ensure health and succession, while historians still debate the effectiveness or symbolism of such practices. You cradle the infant, feeling the delicate convergence of miracle, strategy, and survival. And so you trudge through the night, exhausted but profoundly alive, aware that the palace holds its collective breath even as your body begins to heal. Every glance, every whispered word, every ceremonial gesture is both acknowledgement and evaluation. Yet in this moment, the pulse of life in your arms carries more meaning than centuries of expectation. The child is here, the dynasty continues, and you, queen and mother, have survived the crucible of anticipation, fear, and relentless scrutiny. You trudge along the quiet corridors, your body heavy from labor but your mind lighter in one sense, and yet impossibly tense in another. The child rests swaddled nearby, its tiny breaths like whispered affirmations of survival, yet every flutter, every sigh, every movement sets your nerves on edge. Hey, don't imagine relief lasts long. Postpartum anxiety is its own beast, one that gnaws quietly beneath the surface, invisible but persistent. So steady yourself, adjust your gown, and trudge through these delicate hours with care, because the palace observes not just your recovery but your vigilance. The midwife hovers, checking your pulse, adjusting linens, offering herbal infusions to restore strength. You trudge through the exhaustion, taking small sips of spiced wine and letting the scents of rosemary and lavender calm your frayed nerves. Fringe accounts suggest some queens would perform discreet rituals during the first days after birth, touching charms sewn into the infant's swaddling, murmuring protective prayers, or making small offerings to saints. Historians still debate whether these practices were ritualistic, psychological, or practical, but in the soft candlelight, the gestures feel like a lifeline tethering you to hope. You trudge to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens. The fountains gurgle softly, birds flit among trimmed hedges, and yet every distant sound, the laughter of children, the whisper of attendants, reminds you that the court continues its constant evaluation. Fringe sources claim that postpartum queens were sometimes observed with almost obsessive scrutiny, how they held the child, their posture, their ability to recover, even the color of their cheeks. Scholars still argue about the accuracy of these claims, but you feel the weight of observation pressing in from all directions. The court sends gifts, congratulations, and subtle reminders of expectation. You trudge through each presentation, accepting them with graceful nods while your body aches and your mind spins with worry. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens kept private journals of the newborn's behavior, feeding, and growth, blending superstition with practical vigilance. Historians debate the prevalence and purpose of these records, but you take a careful note of every small detail, feeling that recording is both protection and reassurance. You trudge back to your chamber, where the midwife adjusts the baby's linens and murmurs reassurances. Every cry, every sneeze, every tiny twitch feels amplified, a signal, a message, a test. Fringe historians claim that some queens observed their child in precise intervals, noting patterns and potential omens, believing that early attentiveness could shape health and destiny. Scholars still argue whether these practices were widespread or symbolic, but for you, careful observation is an act of survival. Sleep eludes you, as the palace's whispers carry through hallways like wind through dry leaves. You trudge from window to window, rocking the infant gently, murmuring blessings, tracing charms lightly over swaddling cloths. Fringe sources suggest that queens would sometimes whisper the child's name in rhythm with lullabies or prayers, an invisible shield against sickness or misfortune. Historians debate whether these rituals were protective or symbolic, but your heart finds solace in the rhythm, a small thread of agency amid the endless scrutiny. The king visits briefly, his expression measured, his praise careful. You trudge through the interaction with exhaustion and practiced poise, aware that his gaze evaluates both you and the child, even in fleeting moments. Fringe accounts whisper of postpartum inspections, subtle inquiries about feeding, temperament, or health, often performed discreetly by attendants or advisors. Scholars argue whether such scrutiny was universally applied or limited to high-stakes dynasties, but you feel the invisible tallying, each glance a quiet reminder of your responsibilities. You trudge through meals taken in private, sips of restorative broths and herbal teas, all while keeping an ear tuned for the child's murmurs. Fringe accounts claim that queens sometimes performed protective rituals during feeding, tracing small symbols in the air or softly invoking saints' protection. Historians debate how practical or symbolic these rituals were, but you repeat them quietly, finding comfort in the act itself. The palace itself seems to lean in with anticipation. Courtiers whisper about the child's appearance, growth, and health, sometimes offering praise, sometimes subtle caution. You trudge through these murmurs, aware that even positive commentary carries implications for your continued favor and status. Fringe sources suggest that some queens kept small charms hidden in the nursery, continuing protection rituals for weeks after birth. Scholars still debate whether these were standard practice or exceptional, but you embrace them as an extension of your control in a world otherwise ruled by expectation. And so you trudge through the first fragile days of motherhood, balancing exhaustion, relief, vigilance, and anxiety. Every small cry, every twitch, every tiny heartbeat is a reminder that the court watches, that generations of dynastic expectation press upon you, and that survival and legacy are intertwined in ways both tangible and invisible. You trudge forward, rocking the child gently, whispering prayers, tracing charms, and counting each breath as an affirmation. The dynasty continues, and you, queen and mother, endure. You trudge along the familiar corridors once more, your body still tender from birth but your mind alert, sharp, and wary. The palace hums with renewed activity, courtiers gossiping behind painted screens, advisors whispering in shadowed corners, and nobles striding purposefully as if their boots can imprint influence onto the stone floors themselves. Hey, don't imagine the birth grants you immunity. Political life in the palace resumes instantly, and your vigilance is far from optional. So adjust your gown, steady your shoulders, and trudge forward into the web of intrigue awaiting you. Even with the newborn swaddled nearby, you can feel the currents of jealousy and ambition swirl through the chambers. You trudge past the ladies in waiting, noting how some smile too broadly, others pause too long in polite conversation. Fringe accounts suggest that queens were acutely aware of rivalries among attendants, sometimes planting subtle signs of favor or disfavor to maintain equilibrium. Historians still debate whether these maneuvers were strategic or exaggerated by chroniclers, but in your careful observation, every glance is a signal, every gesture a negotiation. You trudge into a council chamber, where whispers about the heir's future already circulate. Advisors discuss alliances, the child's position in succession, and even the queen's own decisions in matters of governance. Fringe sources claim that some queens subtly used these conversations to assert influence, leveraging the newborn's existence to shape court policy. Scholars still argue how common this practice was, but you feel the delicate dance. Every word, every nod, every measured pause matters in maintaining authority and stability. The courtiers are relentless. You trudge through subtle barbs masked as compliments, hushed inquiries disguised as polite concern, and faint insinuations about loyalty and competence. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens engaged in quiet psychological strategies, observing reactions to small gestures or testing allegiances through social rituals. Historians still debate whether these behaviors were widespread or exceptional, but you trudge along, balancing discretion with careful assertion of influence. In the nursery, you pause to check on the child. You trudge through layers of worry. Is the infant feeding well, sleeping safely, responding normally? Fringe historians claim that queens sometimes conducted detailed observations, noting patterns of behavior and minor anomalies, believing early attentiveness would safeguard the heir's survival. Scholars still debate the accuracy or universality of these accounts, but your watchfulness feels essential, a tether to agency in the swirling palace politics. You trudge back into the corridors where whispers follow you like shadows. Some courtiers speculate on your postpartum recovery, others on the child's legitimacy, and some, fringe sources suggest, even plot subtly to undermine your authority. Historians still debate the prevalence of such overt scheming versus anecdotal exaggeration, but for you, the tension is unmistakable. Every smile, every curtsy, every nod is part of a larger performance, carefully calibrated to preserve both your dignity and the child's future. You notice the Queen Mother's eyes from across the hall, a mix of pride, expectation, and subtle judgment. Fringe accounts suggest that intergenerational tensions in royal households often centered on succession, with older queens or dowagers quietly influencing court opinion. Scholars still argue about the extent of these dynamics, but in your chest, the pressure feels immediate and real. You trudge through the delicate interaction, acknowledging respect, concealing fear, and projecting control with every gesture. The king, too, resumes his public duties, leaving you to navigate the court's currents with heightened awareness. You trudge along, attending formal meetings, greeting visiting dignitaries, and observing alliances forming and dissolving in subtle shifts of gaze and posture. Fringe sources suggest that queens often acted as unseen moderators, influencing political balance while maintaining the appearance of ceremonial detachment. Historians still debate how much power was wielded versus imagined, but you navigate it with deliberate care. Every day brings new scrutiny. You trudge through whispered speculation about the child's health, your authority, and even your next potential pregnancy. Fringe accounts claim that queens maintained private rituals for protection and influence during these periods, from charms placed near the cradle to quiet prayers at dawn. Scholars continue to debate their prevalence and impact, but for you, the acts provide fragments of reassurance in a palace otherwise dictated by gossip and expectation. And so you trudge through the post-birth resumption of court life, balancing tenderness with vigilance, maternal instinct with political acumen, and private fear with public composure. The palace is a living organism, every glance, every murmur, every gesture a pulse in the complex system of power surrounding you. Fringe or factual, ritual or strategy, it all converges into one constant truth. To survive, to preserve the child, to maintain authority, you must navigate the swirling currents of jealousy, ambition, and expectation with every measured step. You trudge through the nursery once more, the child swaddled in soft linen, eyes blinking curiously at the flickering candlelight. Every coo, every yawn, every tiny movement feels like both miracle and responsibility. Hey, don't think these early days are only about cuddles. They're the first steps in a subtle, lifelong education in courtly awareness, because the moment the child opens eyes, the palace begins to weigh and teach them. So steady your hands, whisper gentle words, and trudge forward into the delicate task of shaping a future monarch. You trudge down corridors, carrying the infant for the first public appearance since birth. Courtiers gather in hushed anticipation, eyes sharp, smiles measured. Fringe accounts suggest that queens often time the child's exposure to public events with precision. Too early, and superstition might cry vulnerability. Too late, and courtly approval could wane. Historians still debate how calculated these introductions were, but for you, the child's very presence is a performance of survival, legitimacy, and future promise. The child is cradled in your arms as you enter the hall. You trudge through the choreography of greeting dignitaries. Slight bow, careful smile, whisper of reassurance to the infant, subtle signaling to attendants. Fringe sources claim that queens sometimes practice gestures or positions for these appearances, ensuring that the newborn projected health, vitality, and dynastic significance. Scholars argue whether these actions were widespread strategy or ceremonial formality, but every measured sway, every quiet coo feels like a tiny assertion of control over perception. You notice how the court observes everything, The child's color, the alertness of eyes, the steadiness of hands, even the queen's posture. You trudge through the awareness that each detail will ripple through gossip, influence alliances, and subtly shape opinions about the dynasty's future. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens instructed attendants to monitor reactions, quietly reporting how each noble responded to the child's presence. Historians still debate the prevalence and intentionality of these practices, but your mind catalogs every glance, every murmur, every subtle nod. Lessons begin unconsciously, through touch, tone, and timing. You trudge through each interaction, whispering soft guidance into the infant's ear, using cadence, intonation, and gentle motion to instill calm and awareness. Fringe sources claim that some queens would recite short prayers, family mottos, or dynastic stories even to infants, blending protection with education. Scholars debate the effectiveness, but you feel the rhythm of legacy building with each murmur, each lullaby, each careful placement in your arms. The child begins to respond, blinking at movement, grasping tiny fingers, cooing in gentle mimicry. You trudge through the delicate balance of encouraging interaction while guarding the infant from overexposure to courtly eyes. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens rotated attendants strategically, ensuring the child experienced both variety and continuity in observation. Historians still argue about how structured these exposures truly were, but the principle is clear. Early impressions shape perception, and perception shapes survival. Every corridor and hall becomes a classroom. You trudge with the infant past musicians practicing fanfare, observing knights drilling, and courtiers arranging diplomatic papers. Fringe sources claim that queens sometimes timed these exposures to familiar rituals, ensuring the child associated sound, movement, and ceremony with security and authority. Scholars debate whether these early introductions had any real cognitive impact, but you note the subtle cues in the child's reactions, adjusting your rhythm and gestures accordingly. You trudge through quiet instructions whispered to attendants. Position near the light, but not too bright. Hold arms steady. Ensure the infant sees each dignitary with calm attentiveness. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens meticulously orchestrated every visual and auditory element, believing these early experiences influenced temperament and social acumen. Historians still question whether this was standard practice or exceptional devotion, but you embrace every small ritual, every gesture, as a foundation for both protection and future agency. You notice the subtle political play resuming around you. Courtiers observe your handling of the child, noting your composure, strategy, and care. You trudge through subtle signals of favor or jealousy, maintaining poise while mentally cataloging alliances and potential threats. Fringe accounts whisper that queens sometimes used these early appearances to subtly assert authority, reminding the court that the queen and her heir are central to the dynastic narrative. Scholars debate the efficacy or intention of these gestures, but you feel every movement carry weight far beyond the chamber walls. By evening, the child rests quietly, eyes half closed, absorbing the subtle lessons of palace life in their own small, mysterious way. You trudge back to the private chamber, cradling the infant and reflecting on the subtle choreography of courtly introduction. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered lullaby has been a lesson in perception, authority, and survival. Fringe sources claim that queens meticulously documented these early exposures, creating a blueprint for the child's gradual integration into court life. Scholars still debate whether these records were widespread or exceptional, but for you, the act itself is a lifeline, an assertion that in this palace, every detail matters. And so you trudge through the delicate, tender, and strategic beginning of your heir's education. The child's tiny fingers curl in your grasp, every blink and coo a lesson, every gesture a reflection of dynastic continuity. The palace watches, judges, and learns along with you, and you, queen and mother, continue to carry the intertwined weight of protection, strategy, and legacy. You trudge through the quiet halls of the palace, the infant nestled safely in your arms, the flickering candlelight painting gold and shadow across tapestries and stone. The weight of days, months, and years presses gently but insistently upon your shoulders. Hey, don't think the work is done. Survival alone is not enough. You are a queen, a mother, a symbol of lineage, and every heartbeat in your chest echoes the expectations of generations. So trudge forward, breathe slowly, and let reflection settle over you like a soft cloak in the evening. You notice how the palace itself seems to breathe with you. Each whisper from distant corridors, every faint clatter of armor, the soft rustle of silk, all these small sounds remind you that the world continues, and yet the world also watches. Fringe accounts claim that queens often contemplated their legacy in these quiet moments, weighing the balance between duty, desire, and mortality. Historians still debate whether such reflection was practical, spiritual, or narrative embellishment, but you trudge along, feeling the full spectrum of responsibility and hope entwined in each careful step. Your hands cradle the child, tiny and miraculous, every flicker of eyelash and flex of finger a reminder that survival is intertwined with purpose. You trudge through the thoughts of what it means to carry an heir, to safeguard the dynasty, to teach a new life the intricacies of courtly awareness before even the first proper word is spoken. Fringe sources suggest that some queens would meditate on their own mortality and the child's potential reign, whispering prayers or affirmations meant to strengthen both their resolve and the child's destiny. Scholars still argue whether these moments were widely practiced or literary embellishments, but the act itself feels vital in the quiet, lamp-lit chamber. You trudge along corridors where shadows stretch like history itself, each one a reminder of queens past, heirs lost, and dynasties forged in blood and whispers. Every step is a conversation with time, every breath a negotiation with expectation. Fringe accounts claim that some queens would quietly touch family relics or ancestral symbols, connecting their hopes to centuries of lineage. Historians debate whether such practices were ritualistic, symbolic, or psychological support. But for you, the connection is palpable, a thread tying past, present, and future. The palace hums faintly, a gentle accompaniment to your reflections. You trudge through memories of fear, anticipation, labor, and triumph, realizing how every ritual, every charm, every whisper of hope has shaped both you and your child. Fringe sources suggest that queens often consider the child's early experiences as foundational, imbuing them with lessons in observation, decorum, and subtlety. Scholars still debate the efficacy or intent, but you see in each blink and sigh of your child the beginnings of understanding, the threads of awareness that will grow with years. You trudge past familiar halls where portraits of ancestors peer from gilded frames. Their painted eyes seem to watch, silent yet knowing. Fringe accounts suggest that some queens would reflect on these ancestral visages, imagining conversations, guidance, or silent approval, blending reality and ritual. Historians argue whether such introspection was practical or symbolic, but you let yourself linger, imagining a line of strength, wisdom, and vigilance extending from the past to your own arms. The weight of dynastic duty is never far from your mind. You trudge through questions of succession, alliances, and survival, not just for your child, but for the continuation of the realm itself. Fringe historians claim that queens often internalized anxieties about heirs as lifelong companions, shaping decisions, daily routines, and public demeanor. Scholars debate the psychological impact of these pressures, but you feel the tension and responsibility woven into your every gesture, breath, and step. You notice small, tender moments. The child grasping a finger, the faint warmth of breath on your wrist, the soft coo that feels like a lullaby from the future. You trudge through the realization that legacy is not only public acclaim or dynastic survival, it is the fragile daily act of nurturing life, teaching resilience, and enduring expectation. Fringe accounts whisper that some queens considered these small domestic moments as equally powerful as public ceremonies in shaping the child's destiny. Historians debate the balance of political versus personal influence, but in this quiet chamber, the personal feels monumental. You trudge through thoughts of your own identity, balancing maternal instinct with queenly duty, private fear with public composure. Every glance from the court, every shadow in the hallway, every whisper of rumor lingers, but you learn to integrate vigilance with tenderness, observation with care. Fringe sources suggest that this duality, the intertwining of authority and maternal instinct, was central to the queen's survival and the dynasty's continuity. Scholars still debate the universality of this duality, but you feel its weight, subtle yet persistent, in every fiber of your being. And so you trudge through the quiet hours, reflecting on the journey, the months of anxious waiting, the labor's fear and intensity, the court's scrutiny, and now the delicate nurturing of your child. Every breath, every heartbeat, every whispered prayer or charm is part of an unbroken thread, connecting past queens to present duties and future hope. Fringe accounts claim that queens would meditate on these threads, acknowledging both the fragility and endurance of life, while historians continue to debate the interpretation. For you, the act of reflection itself feels like protection, wisdom, and reassurance all at once. You trudge through the knowledge that the palace watches, that the dynasty waits, and that your role as queen and mother is inseparable. Every gesture, every lullaby, every careful movement shapes perception and ensures survival. Fringe historians claim that some queens whispered their hopes into the child's ears each night, small rituals of reassurance and intention. Scholars debate their practical influence, but you do so anyway, finding comfort in continuity, tradition, and the small, tangible power of your care. And as the night deepens, the palace quiets and the candles flicker low, you trudge one last time to the window, the infant cradled safely in your arms. The gardens shimmer faintly in the moonlight, shadows stretching like whispers of generations past and future. You breathe slowly, feeling the rhythm of life and hope pulsing between you and the child. Legacy is not only expectation, duty, or survival. It is also the quiet, tender, relentless endurance of love, vigilance, and presence. You trudge through these reflections, letting the weight settle soft yet eternal across your shoulders. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the palace fade into quiet shadows. The corridors, the whispers, the golden candelabras, all recede into stillness as you cradle your child, letting the heartbeat echo gently in your own chest. Each tiny breath, each subtle flutter of movement carries the promise of survival, hope, and quiet triumph over centuries of expectation. Imagine the tapestries swaying softly in the night breeze, the portraits of ancestors gazing with silent approval, and the palace settling into a calm rhythm as if exhaling centuries of anxiety. Breathe in, slowly letting tension drift away, and exhale, releasing the invisible weight of observation, scrutiny, and dynastic pressure. Imagine the child's warmth against your chest, a soft reminder that legacy is lived in tender moments, not only in ceremonies and courtly scrutiny. Let each flicker of candlelight and every gentle whisper of the night guide your mind into ease, allowing the palace, the dynasty, and all its expectation to dissolve into a comforting, protective calm. As your eyelids grow heavy, allow the rhythms of the palace, heartbeat, breath, candle flicker, to become a lullaby. You have carried centuries of anxiety, endured scrutiny, and shaped life itself. And now, in the quiet, you rest. The future lies gently in your arms, a fragile, enduring thread of hope, resilience, and love. Let the palace fade, the whispers soften, and your mind drift, knowing that duty, survival, and legacy have been honored, and the next day you will rise to continue. But for now, let the quiet settle. Sweet dreams.